Good morning, everyone. First, I'd like to say that it's our pleasure to underwrite this conference along with our friends from Lockheed Martin. And on a personal note, I feel very honored to share this stage with many other distinguished speakers. I want to talk a bit about the data side of the discussion we've been having all morning. And I chose to title the talk, Shining a Light on Dark Data. One of the clients I called on one time talked about the amount of data they have in their enterprise and the amount of data that they're using to create business advantage. And they said that they thought they were only using 20% of their data to create an advantage for their enterprise. They had the data, they felt the data had insights in it, but they said that 80% of the data in their enterprise was dark. And so the question then I think we're compelled to ask is, how are we going to shine light on the dark data? If we believe there are insights there, if we believe the data will give us abilities to get a leg up on our competitors, and that's, the competitor word can be used just as well in a mission military environment as it can in a commercial environment. How are we going to do that? Now, a couple weeks ago, I had the opportunity to visit Las Vegas, and one of the things that any technical person will do while visiting Las Vegas, if they haven't already done it 100 times, is visit Hoover Dam. And when you visit Hoover Dam, it's a very physically impressive thing. I'm sure many of you have been on the tour and gone inside the dam and seen the scope of that project, the size of Lake Mead, the incredible power that's generated by the power stations there. And that's all courtesy of the Colorado River. And so as you go through the archives and some of the movies they show you leading up to your tour, you'll see the Colorado River before Hoover Dam was built. And it got me thinking about this idea of data. If we think about data as a river, so think about instrumenting a physical process. Think about all of the instrumentation, all the communication we have in almost every domain of business and warfare. And giving credit to the military has been instrumenting battlefields and drawing those battle space pictures with airplanes and tanks and lightning bolts. The idea of an instrumented battle space, the military was on that long before the commercial world was, because they needed to be. And they had to invent a lot of the technology to do it before it was commonly commercially available. And that's all about instrumenting the physical world and being able to make a digital replica of the physical world. So these rivers of data, like the Colorado River, and the opportunity to build something like Hoover Dam to harness that energy in a dramatic way, exist everywhere. The oil and gas industry, when they build a platform, an oil drilling platform, it has 80 to 100,000 sensors in it when it's built. The platform will probably generate upwards of 15 petabytes of data in its operational lifetime. And that's just the physical instrumentation on the platform itself. There's an equally important element of this, which is the humans that operate that platform, the data they're presented with, the decisions they make, the outcomes that result from those human decisions. That's logged too. And we're going to come back to that in a minute with a military example of that. But that's incredibly powerful because we know what all the human experts have done. We know what data we presented them. We know how much insight we offered them within the human decision time window. We know what they chose to do historically, and we can advise people that face similar situations in the future. Now, to the point about the imperative of data, I don't know a single large customer, military, intelligence, commercial, any industry. You sit down with them, I don't know any customer that wouldn't say, my primary determiner for my future success is what data I have, what data I can get access to, what insights I can extract from that data, and what competitive strategies I can synthesize from that data. Everyone is talking about that. And to give credit where credit's due, again, to the military, when I came down here in 2004, starting out a job as the Federal Chief Technology Officer for IBM, one of the first presentations I gave was at the C4ISR Summit that the Air Force held up at Hanscom Air Force Base. And General Jumper was the chief at that time, and I can remember like it was yesterday. The chief stood on the stage at Hanscom, and he said, I have a new best friend. And my new best friend is the airman with the Coke bottle glasses sitting in the basement of the Pentagon, because that airman knows where my target is. 2004, General Jumper, right? Don't tell me that the department doesn't get this or it's recent. They get it, and it's not recent, right? So let's talk about the river. If there's a river of data and you can build Hoover Dam, I think you want to be sure that you're the one that builds Hoover Dam. And I think you want to be sure that when the power plant generates electricity, it goes to your cities, right? You can use that analogy, I think, pretty well. Let me talk about sitting with a client in the oil and gas petroleum business. We had a discussion about data and dark data. Now, these companies spend a king's ransom exploring the under-earth environment. They do all kinds of seismic imaging, looking for oil, modeling oil reservoirs. They spend billions of dollars on this. It's an obvious case of very, very valuable data obtained at great expense that literally determines their success or failure going forward. And so I talked to this client at their request. They wanted to talk about data and large sources of data and analytics and artificial intelligence and what can I do to get competitive advantage, this very topic we're talking about. And I said, well, where are the skills? Where's the expertise in your enterprise? They said, oh, well, we use contractors for that. There are these service companies. There are many famous service companies in the oil industry, and they analyze the data for us. I said, that's interesting. Under what rights do they get your data? And they looked at me and they said, what do you mean? I said, well, you just told me you spent a fortune getting it. You just told me that it's the most important thing that determines my future success, and then you told me that you gave it to someone else to analyze for you. What restrictions do they have? What rights do they have? What protections do you have? We don't know. We'll ask the legal department over lunch. Let's break for lunch, and we'll come back from lunch, and we'll have an answer. And so one of the lawyers came back after lunch, and he had his head down. And they said, Fred, what's the answer? He said, we give them our data. They do some analysis, but they can do anything with that data that they want. And I'm not even sure we can get our own data back. Isn't that interesting? Now, that's a long time ago, and that's all changed. But that was a company that arguably had a tremendous insight about the value of data, the insight from data, but they hadn't thought about data as being on a level with every other strategic entity in their enterprise. More on that in a little bit. Transportation, common example, smart vehicles, smart roads, hundreds of megabytes a second coming off of cars, most cars having that capability either now or within 5 or 10 years. Human beings, over our lifespan, given what we know today about going forward, each of us will probably generate a terabyte, maybe 10 terabytes of data over our lifetime. How can that be used to help us ensure our health? You heard an example already this morning about Gorgon Stare, the Argus IS program, one of the most prodigious data sources anyone's ever seen, not just in the military ISR world, but on the planet. And the challenge there is what insights can I get from it and how quickly can I extract them? So again, I won't go over that. You've already heard that today. So what does it mean to a mission? Well, let's talk about an example from human health. Some of you probably saw the early Watson system that we put on the television show Jeopardy to play against humans. And we did that to make a point. Many of you remember when we built the chess machine, the Deep Blue chess machine. The point we wanted to make at that time was computers could do something that was a lot like certain kinds of thinking. Computers weren't just back office instruments to count things and tabulate things. They could actually have tremendous value in doing things that looked like humans to thinking. And a common analogy at the time was if you can play chess, you're thinking. Now a computer plays chess in a very different way than a human does, but playing Garry Kasparov in chess and winning that chess match had an enormous effect on lighting up the imagination of our clients, of the world in general, even of our own people. And so we thought about what's the next step. And it was about 10 years later that we said the next step has to be in human language, human insight, human cognition. And so the idea was hatched, it's a fun story for another day, how we decided that we would try to build a machine that played Jeopardy in public, on TV, in the 100th anniversary year of our company, named after our founder. You think that's a gutsy move? It certainly was. And so we built that system, and again, some of you saw it on TV, it impressed a lot of people. In fact, many of the academics that kind of said, oh, this is too hard and they're just grandstanding, after the match was aired, came back and said, you know what? We were wrong. They did something really interesting. They found a way to harness 20 years of natural language processing and knowledge management and a dozen different domains that had proceeded as separate academic domains. They found a way using machine learning to fuse those together to solve a problem in a moment. And so I thought the academics were a classy bunch because they had kind of thrown stones at it, but then once we proved our point, they were the first ones to come out and make a really interesting insight about what we had done. Shortly after that, of course, our goal wasn't just to play Jeopardy, that was to fire people's imaginations. So the first real domain we went after was healthcare, and we worked with some of the top academic physicians. And I can remember talking to Dr. Herb Chase at Columbia at the time And Herb told us a story about when he was a resident, a young resident. And it was a story that felt a lot like the TV show House, where they had a patient who had a critical condition. They could not come up with a successful diagnosis, and they were in a race against the clock that she might lose her life. And it was a random connection through a colleague of a colleague that suggested something that none of them would have ever thought of. They found it. It turned out to be the correct diagnosis. They saved the woman's life. Dr. Chase tells a story about becoming lifelong friends with this patient. This is an example of this human and machine partnership or teamwork. Again, you've heard references to it already today. So think of the human as being deep. Think of the human having insight. Think of the human having instincts. Think of the human having a lifetime of experience. I tend to think of that as a depth dimension. Think of a system that can process documents, all the documents in the medical literature. It can understand them well enough to know what they're about, what their opinions are, and to parse them into usable pieces by humans. If the expert humans teach the machine through training what kinds of things are relevant to a specific case, I can literally have a physician ask our Watson system to read the entire world's medical literature that could be possibly relevant to the case in front of them, and that's a breadth. The machine provides a breadth. No human can provide that breadth. No physician can keep up with all the papers. But the physician can teach the machine what they're interested in, and the machine can survey the whole medical literature, and the machine comes back with not an answer. It doesn't try to dictate to the physician how to practice medicine. It comes back with suggestions, and it's ready to explain itself. It doesn't just say, this is what you should do. It says, here are the 3 articles I found in the entire world's medical literature that are most relevant to the problem you face at this moment. This is why I selected them. Here's the evidence profile. You didn't see this on the TV show on Jeopardy. And if you, human physician, want to click on those things and understand why I picked it and go read that passage for yourself, here it is. So what's the highest service I can provide a physician in that case? Tying all the pieces of the world's medical knowledge relevant to the case of that moment to the physician at the moment of decision in maybe a 10-second to 2-minute time frame. And so we took the Watson system that played Jeopardy. We didn't redo any of the training. We took out the Beatles lyrics and the baseball scores and the sports history, and we put in some medical textbooks, and we had Herb throw his case when he was a resident at the system, and the correct diagnosis was within the top 10 of the first query that he made. And he turned to us and he said, gentlemen and ladies, you are onto something here, right? And I remember that like it was yesterday. So there's an example that's very human. Let's give a military example. Many years ago, we were approached by the Navy and one of their contractors that said, we're going to build this new destroyer, now fielded. It was called DDX at the time, the Zumwalt class. And they said, we don't want to use low-level real-time machine language code on the bridge of this ship because the commander of that ship is going to have to deal with an incredible variety of threats. We need a higher level language. We need deeper, more capable, flexible computing on the bridge of that warship to assist the commander. The runtime that we want is Java. Now, the techies in the room know that one of the nice things about Java is it manages memory for you, which means that it has to go and tidy its memory up from time to time. And if you're running a warship and someone shoots a missile at you and your system says, excuse me, I'm going to go garbage collect my memory, this would not be a good day. And so the Navy and their contractor came to us and said, do you think it's possible to do a Java runtime that's actually deterministic? Now remember, deterministic means a maximum guaranteed latency. It's speed. The speed itself is a different question. And the answer is yes, you can. We had a research project that had examined that, and we hustled that into product. And so it got me thinking for today's talk, think of that commander of that destroyer with the kind of techniques you've been hearing about this morning. And if what I've done is I've instrumented the bridge of that destroyer, and I've taken data over all of the commanders that have sailed all the Navy ships into harm's way over time, I can provide you, the human commander of that ship, a history. This situation you find yourself in the next 3 seconds, here are the 15 times that men and women have been commanding ships in the United States Navy that faced similar things. Here were the choices they made. Here are the best recommendations I can make, like I make to the physician. And here are the courses of action and what happened in the past. That's a revolution in decision making. It's still a human decision. It's still a human decision based on human values and human intelligence, but it's a decision based on taking the entire river of data that's relevant and compressing it into that human decision window. So that's what we're talking about. So does the Department of Defense get this? You bet they do. You've heard about the Pathfinder Maven. Many of you know about all the follow-on programs that are being planned. If I were going to give 3 pieces of advice to the department from this podium today, it would be this. Number 1, like our friends at the oil company, like our friends in medicine, understand that the data and the insight from the data is as powerful as any other kinetic or other weapon system you will build, and find a management philosophy that has it compete on an equal footing for creating effects in your mission. So that involves things like appointing chief data officers and other things, which is well underway. But it's a profound thought that data is as powerful as all the things you've done in the past. The second thing I would say, and you've heard it once from the stage already this morning, you have to care about the data as much as you care about the code. We have a very good discipline of managing code and doing all kinds of incremental updates and source code control. In the world of AI, the pedigree of the data, can I trust it? What does it mean? How is it structured? Who owned it? What's its provenance? How do I maintain it over time? Because the data, in large part, determines what the system gives you. The system's job is to learn. The code learns. The data provides the information. So care for the data as much as you care for the code. And then finally, even though the department has an enormous R&D investment, as you've heard before, this commercial investment in aggregate is much larger. So any sensible strategy in the DoD is going to have to be thoughtful about what do I leverage and what do I lead. And one example of something where the department might lead is a lot of the commercial uses of AI, whether it's machine learning or especially deep learning, require enormous volume of data. Not every problem in defense even has an enormous volume of data. Think about something like electronic warfare. We might have to create data with physics simulations. So this idea of AI and impoverished data is one example of an area where probably the commercial world won't do it and probably the military is going to have to lead. And thank heaven that the folks up at the Air Force Research Lab in Rome actually have started a program looking at this question of doing AI with impoverished data. So it's been my pleasure to be with you this morning. It's our pleasure to be one of the major sponsors of this conference, and I want to thank you all for your time very much.